is Hewie Rattray, the CEO of the London Bitcoin Company. The name change happened, Hewie, as promised. So congratulations on that. I guess you're pretty happy about the name change.
Good morning, Mark. Yeah, super happy about the name change. Super happy that we can press forward now with a new brand, new artwork and new logos. And, it saves me a lot of time having to refer to ourselves as soon to be named the London Bitcoin Company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. No, it's good to get that over the line. I've seen a lot of enthusiasm for that in the Telegram group. Lots of people doing artwork with the London Bitcoin Company. Looks really nice, actually. So, yeah, it's nice to get that name fully sorted. The big news, of course, is your recent wrap. So that closed yesterday. You've announced this morning. It was $1 million, pretty much exactly, wasn't it? So just first of all, what was the appetite like amongst the investor base for that wrap?
Yeah, the appetite was really good, and we had demand for far beyond £1 million. But I think there is a careful game to be played in this market, and that is being protective of the share price when sentiment is slightly down, like it is now, and then being aggressive when the sentiment returns. Having said that, we're always having conversations and socializing ourselves with other investors, and I fully understand the game that we're in, or the flywheel that everyone's taking part in, which is raise money, buy more Bitcoin, raise money, buy more Bitcoin. And, I understand some portion of our investor base might not be too sensitive about dilution and where I dilute, but I think it's very important to build a decent cap table, with investors you trust, rather than just taking every penny available to you and plowing it straight into Bitcoin.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've heard this being talked about a lot, this idea of a marathon and a sprint, and you've got people on both sides, really. Some people saying it's really, you should be sprinting to buy Bitcoin and marathoning on the mining front. I mean, we've talked about, well, we haven't really talked about the playbook, and I know that's the word that people use. I would call it a strategy, but I think playbook is the word that people are using here. What can you disclose on that? Because I know it's something that people are really keen to get a sense of, but of course, you are bound by, well, the FCA.
Yeah, I mean, the marathon and the sprint analogy, marathon, not a sprint analogy, and kind of the tortoise and the hare analogy, I think people taking it the wrong way, when myself has talked about that. And what people need to understand, I think, is that I plan to buy Bitcoin for, the next half a decade at least with the London Bitcoin Company, right? And once you get to a certain point in terms of market cap, valuation, NAV, MNAV, the amount of money you can raise becomes quite considerable, and the amount of money available becomes quite considerable. So when we say a marathon, not a sprint, it's about getting slowly to that point where we can then start raising aggressively. And when the market appetite is there and you can pick and choose where you want to take the money from. So it's very easy to look at us right now and say, maybe we're slightly slower than the competition. I don't think we are particularly slower than the competition, but maybe we're not being aggressive enough in some people's opinion. But you need to understand the regulatory structure that we've built up, with the LSE, and what's available to us a bit further down the line in terms of capital and the pools of capital available to us, and understand how we can scale up and catch the competition very quickly when the time comes.
Okay, so you're at the moment you're sort of balancing market sentiment along with investor appetite to scale aggressively, along with conscious of dilution. So your plan would be effectively, when it's a bit more bullish in the sector, to go harder effectively. I mean, how are you basing that on? General sentiment, or share price being up, or comparing it to peers?
General sentiment, and I am always keeping an eye on our peers, because I understand that investors rotate to perhaps the most aggressive or the best Bitcoin accumulator. And, I fully understand the game that investors are playing there, that they want to bounce around the different companies and they want to go with who's fastest or who's executing the most. What I want to do is I want to fully be conscious of my long-term holders rather than the people who trade around the stocks. And what I want to do is I want to build a story around the London Bitcoin Company, and I really want to impress on people where we are and where we're going in terms of capital markets, LSE, and then NASDAQ. And I think it doesn't take a genius to kind of look into the capital available when you go to somewhere like NASDAQ, or when you tap up the bond market on the LSE, to understand why I think we are the best opportunity in the market right now in the UK.
And that NASDAQ, that's, I think it's around September time, but you're going next week to file the F1.
Yeah, the team are going out next week to work on the F1 and work on the final prospectus and file it. So hopefully, we should hear over the summer. I mean, we would expect to hear over the summer, towards the end of July, early August, about an approval. And then it will just be simply, road showing us around New York and around some of the other big capital centers in the US. And yeah, I mean, it'd be sensible for us to kind of wait until September, the second half of September, early October, to actually do the IPO or do the dual listing, just because that's when the fund managers are back in town and liquidity is back.
And what are some of the conditions that you got to fulfill for that NASDAQ? I know one of them where you have to have effectively a bank that backs you, but you've already got that. That's sorted. Yeah,
we've got Dominari Holdings, who are the bank that do most of the Trump family business. They did the American Bitcoin deal for Eric Trump recently. They did some of the DJT deal that recently happened. So they have a great Rolodex of investors that are very close to the current administration in the US. There's no minimum market cap requirement on NASDAQ anymore. And the minimum share price requirement doesn't really factor in, given that we can do a consolidation or a rollback to get ourselves up there. So we would do a 1-for-10 consolidation in with the ADRs. So we would pass that fine. What there is there's some free float requirements, and there's effectively a minimum raise requirement that people can look that up online and kind of understand that, because it's not quite simple enough for me to just say on an interview.
Okay. And what's going on, do you think, generally in the space? You've referred to this as a bit of an arms race before, and of course some fresh news yesterday. Was it the big, beautiful bill, I think it was called, has been passed in Congress there. So that, of course, will basically mean, I think it's further debasement, basically, of the US dollar. So where does that go? You follow the money, you follow the M2. Well, it ends up in equities. It ends up in Bitcoin. Where do you think we are generally in the space at the moment in Bitcoin?
So I think we're just at the start of this run, right? That was a serious event to happen for Bitcoin, and for risk on assets in general, if you want to categorize it as that. So yeah, I mean, that was the bullish indicator that we all really wanted secretly, especially if we're not from the US and we don't really care about the long-term financial health of the US. I care about one thing, and that's the Bitcoin price. And, there's a series of things that have to happen, I think, over the course of the next 6 months or a year for Bitcoin to go to 200, 300, 400K. And, the US printing and spending is one of them. And we can check that one off now comfortably.
Okay. I did watch a stream from Raoul Pol. Of course, he's a big crypto macro trader there. And his projections, if you like, were taking Bitcoin to about 250,000 as we head into year end. So I think September is probably a good time to be hitting that. There's no point doing it in August in the NASDAQ because everyone will be on holiday. So you've got plenty of time to get that all sorted. So just finally, Hewie, your strategy is continue the arms race. You're not slowing down. What do you think would differentiate you from the others out there? There's obviously one company in particular who've raised a lot of money recently and are obviously quite far ahead. They've probably got perhaps that first mover advantage. I know you were starting doing the Treasury earlier, but it just seems they seem to have caught the market a bit more than others at the moment. What do you think differentiates you from the other Treasury plays out there?
Yeah, I mean, the company you're referring to, definitely had a huge run and took advantage of the sentiment behind them and the support behind them by various parties, in the US and around the world. I want to reiterate that I don't think us catching up with them is in any way, shape, or form impossible. I think there's a very realistic chance that when the floodgates open, when it comes to big bond issuances and huge equity issuances, when we're bigger, we can close that gap very quickly, right? And that's what I aim to do. I think I said before on a Twitter space, I didn't come in to do this job to be second best, the second biggest treasury company in the market, or the third or the fourth. It would only satisfy me personally if I was the number one in a year's time, right? And that's my goal, and that's the company's goal, and that's what we're going to go for. So what differentiates us? I think when you look at the capital markets and you look at where you want to be in an arms race, you want to be in the most liquid capital markets where the deepest pockets hang out, right? And I think it's not up for debate that we are there and we're going, to the very most liquid place with the deepest pockets. And as far as I know, the competition aren't.
Well, Hewie Rattray, the CEO of the London Bitcoin Company, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.